Hello, everyone, and welcome to What's New in Historical Fiction. I'm your host, Colin Mustful, and this is a regular panel series that features historical novelists with new and upcoming titles. I'm so glad that you could be here with us, and I'm really excited to talk to our panelists about their novels today. Just a couple of quick announcements. I've set the settings so that you can't use your cameras or microphones, but you can interact with us in the chat. So go ahead and say hello in the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from. We'd love to hear from you. I did set up a landing page with all of our panelists' links, so I'm going to post that in the chat here just as soon as I grab it so that you have access to all of their books in one place. We link those to bookshop.org because when you buy books from bookshop.org, you're supporting the author, you're supporting independent bookstores, and you're also supporting history through fiction because they give a small percent to us as well. I want to thank everyone for registering for this event, and especially those who did make a small contribution. This is a free event, and I would like to always keep it free, but it's very helpful to help us pay for the Zoom platform, for the Eventbrite platform. So I really appreciate that. I am going to invite questions from the audience. I will facilitate discussion here, ask some questions of our panelists, but with about 15 minutes left in the event, I will be looking for questions from the audience, and I'll just ask you to post those in the chat, and I'll be able to look through those throughout the event and ask your question to our panelists. I think that's it. So I'm going to put myself off screen, and then I'm going to ask each one of our panelists to introduce themselves. So let's start with Ezra Harker Shah. Ezra is the author of The Aziola's Cry, a novel published by History Through Fiction. Ezra, if you could say hello and tell us about your book.
Hello. I'm Ezra. Thank you so much, Colin, for having me here. So my book came from some research I was doing as part of my PhD about Mary Shelley and Percy Shelley working together and kind of collaborating on their works. So it's sort of about their 7-year relationship, their terribly tragic lives, their ups, their downs, and particularly about writing, which is obviously what I love.
Thank you, Ezra, and congratulations. Ezra's novel came out on Tuesday.
Yeah, still exciting.
Next, we have Donna Russo. If you could say hello and let us know about your novel.
Hello, everyone. I'm here today to tell you about my novel, Vincent's Women. It is the untold story of all the loves of Vincent's life, and it asks the question, what if everything we know about Vincent van Gogh is all lies? It's my 11th book, and it's personally, by far, the best writing I've ever done. So I'm thrilled to share it with you today.
Well, congratulations on that, and we're excited to hear more about it. Next, let's go to Jill George. Jill was featured in our newsletter today, so if any of our participants are subscribed to our newsletter, you would have seen more about Jill's book there. Jill, if you could say hello and tell us about your novel. Jill?
Jill George.
Oh.
I write to rebalance history. I focus, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I write to rebalance history, focusing on Victorian women who had big successes that have been overshadowed, overlooked by their male counterparts. And I focus on these successes because they really paved the road for women now, but were overshadowed either because of the lack of roles or opportunities that women had, lack of education and whatnot. And I really believe that they paved the road for us today. So today I'm going to talk about my book, A Hopeless Dawn, which locals in Cornwall say was the genesis of a painting, a masterpiece painting. And I fell in love with the painting, and I'm going to tell you a story that I developed because of that painting that's very gothic and emotional and a very fun book to write. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that.
Thanks, Jill. And maybe you and Donna, have a little bit in common there with painters and paintings being related to your novels.
Strong women.
And
Definitely.
strong women. Absolutely. I connected to that immediately. Yeah. As does
And
Stephanie.
Right. And
well,
Ezra.
let's bring on Stephanie next. If you could tell us a little bit about becoming Madam Secretary.
Hi, everybody. I'm Stephanie Dray. I write primarily historical women's fiction about founding mothers of the United States. You might have known my book, America's First Daughter, or My Dear Hamilton. Those are about founding mothers at the foundation of the American Republic. And now I'm back with Becoming Madam Secretary, which is a book about a 20th century founding mother, Frances Perkins, who was the architect of the New Deal. She was our very first female cabinet secretary, and I believe she is the most important woman in American history. And I know that's a big claim, but I will die on this hill. And after we talk, I think you're going to climb up on the hill with me and mount the cannons.
Excited for that.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Stephanie. Well, let's go first to Donna. In our pre-meeting here, Donna was talking about the inspiration for a novel about Vincent van Gogh called Vincent's Women. So Donna, tell us a little bit about that inspiration and then how you found your way into that story.
Okay. As I was telling the group as we were getting ready, I have not been, like Vincent, I have not been lucky in love. And I had gone on yet another first and last date. And I was having quite the pity party on my couch. As I told him, I think there was a great deal of junk food involved. And I lived in an apartment, open floor plan, vaulted ceilings, and my dining nook was dedicated to Vincent, all of prints, obviously. And one was a self-portrait. And in this pity party, I looked up at him and I said, Vincent, what was your love like, really like? I know about the prostitute, but there has to be more to it. Well, Vincent's portrait didn't answer me. So I started reading. And what I started to uncover demanded that I write this novel.
And how did you kind of navigate your way into the story? I know you rely on Joanna Van Gogh. So talk about how you were able to find your voice for this story.
It's very interesting. Joanna guides us through this story, and she really is the only woman who could have done so. If not for Joanna, I think it highly probable that Vincent van Gogh and his works would have faded away to obscurity. Joanna was married to Vincent's brother Theo, who died 6 months after Vincent did. She was a young widow, having been married less than 2 years, and she had a 1-year-old child. She needed to find a way to support them, which was not easy for women in the 1890s. But what she did have was hundreds and hundreds of Vincent's paintings. And with the help of the artistic friends that she had made, she started exhibiting them. And the rest is truly art history. The other thing she had, and this is what truly brought me into this story, was the over thousands of letters that the family had exchanged. Most of them are Vincent's letters, but there are also letters between the siblings, between Vincent and his family, his friends, other artists, and he bared his soul in his letters. There was even letters from his mother to her family when Vincent was a child. And it's those letters that I was able to reconstruct his childhood. And I do want to say that my book is the only book on Vincent van Gogh. It's the only movie It's not a movie, maybe someday. It's the only work that gives us Vincent's life from birth to death. Every other medium has either started when he started painting or focused on a single woman in his life. This one is much more far-reaching, and it is because of these letters. Joanna found these letters, she put them in chronological order, and she translated them into 4 different languages and have them published. And these letters are so startling. The secrets, the truth that they reveal. It demanded that I write this book, and it completely changed my perspective on Vincent van Gogh.
Well, it sounds like that was a lot of work. Congratulations on putting all that together. I want to ask you more about what you discovered, but let's move next to Ezra. Ezra, you have a novel about Mary and Percy Shelley. I want to ask you a number of things, but it was being that Donna is talking about bringing out the reality of it's kind of a fictional biography. You have the same thing going on with Mary and Percy Shelley, who we know from the literature we read and the movies that have been made. But what did you find out about their actual lives, and why was it important for you to put that on the page?
As you were talking there, Donna, you were talking about that moment of asking the painting a question and then having to find the answer yourself. And I think,
yes,
for me, this huge thing was that I sort of loved Percy Shelley's poetry, and then studied Frankenstein at university. And went, oh, great, I want to know what their relationship was like. And I couldn't find an answer. And I think probably similar to you, I just went, right, I'm going to try and find this out, start researching a little bit. And then it becomes, okay, this story hasn't been told properly.
right.
And I think the Shelley story has been told in bits and pieces, and they pop up in movies. And I think they get sensationalized. They get kind of blown up to be larger than life. And they suffer from something that I've started calling the Ted and Sylvia effect, where you have 2 writers, one of them, you always have to kind of pick a side. You're looking at a couple, which I think is going to inevitably do a disservice. And what I was really fascinated, the more I was researching, was that this was a pair who were working together. And I hadn't seen anybody talk about them as collaborators. But they are constantly writing in the margins of each other's works. There's a beautiful bit of their diary where the pen changes hands halfway through. It changes tense. So it's like Percy was there, Mary was also with, and halfway through the word with, it changes hands to a different handwriting. Mary was also with me. And this beautiful, like, Percy was there, Mary was with me. Like, that's what person is speaking there. Is really gorgeous. So I wanted to look at what that collaborative relationship was like, because I rely on other writers a lot. I teach creative writing, and I'm always telling my students, you have to work with your peers, you have to share your work. You might say, oh, I've sat by myself, I've written a 300-page novel, it's brilliant, nobody else has touched it. Almost certainly another pair of eyes looking over that are going to say, hey, what about this? Oh, wait, that bit's confusing. This bit's brilliant, do more of this. And so to think of these 2 incredible writers sitting side by side, writing away, same theme, same subject, same characters sometimes pop up in both of their works at completely different time periods. I wanted to know what that relationship was like. So it was a lot of digging, a lot of looking at manuscripts, and marvelous fun the whole time.
Sounds wonderful.
Yeah, I think both of you have shown just how much work does go into bringing these stories to life. And that's one thing I love about historical fiction, is getting to know the authors and the work they had to go through. I want to go next to Stephanie, who has a novel here about Frances Perkins. And this is a little bit different because Frances may have accomplished just as much as our other protagonists, but we know much less about who Frances Perkins was. So tell us a little bit about Frances Perkins and why it's important for readers to know her story.
So when I say she was the most important woman in American history, it's because even though we have a female vice president, we've had a female Speaker of the House, we have had other female secretaries, I cannot think of any American woman who has shaped an entire century. And for that matter, I can't think of many men who have done so. Frances Perkins was the most consequential cabinet secretary since Alexander Hamilton, and you know I'm fond of him. But if you look around you today, Frances is everywhere. If you look overhead and there is a sprinkler system to make sure you don't burn alive in a fire, you can thank Frances Perkins for that. She was a social activist before she became FDR's Secretary of Labor. If you had a weekend, you can thank her. If you ate at a restaurant and there were no rat droppings in your food, you can thank her for food safety regulations and for work hour limitations. If you or anyone you know has ever collected Social Security payments, you can thank Frances. That was her brainchild. And her solicitor of labor said that she more or less forced FDR to have this program. So it is his most enduring legacy. And yet it was actually a woman who was behind it. And that is not to diminish FDR. I think he's one of our greatest presidents of all time, in spite of the fact that he could sometimes be a rat bastard.
Oh,
But his best instincts were served by Frances, who was an indefatigable activist who kept agitating for social change to form the modern world as we know. Oh, I even forgot, if your kids went to school and they didn't have to go work at a factory, also Frances Perkins, child labor laws. So the sort of breadth of her accomplishments is absolutely startling. And the fact that we don't often know her name is a shame. There should be a park or a street named after her in every city in America. So let's get on that.
I agree. I have to tell you, Stephanie, I just started your book, and Stephanie's writing is so well crafted. It's lyrical and yet at the same time tight and impactful. And I'm only a chapter in, and I'm doing all the work, and I'm thinking, okay, when can I go back to it? I'm a chapter in and I'm hooked. I'm hooked.
That's very sweet.
Well, that's fantastic, Stephanie. I can definitely relate to many of the things you said, and I had no idea that Frances Perkins originated them. Well, let's go to Jill next. Jill, you have a strong female lead in Effie, but Effie, I believe, is fictional. So tell me about who Effie is and how you use her to tell this story set in Cornwall.
I will do that, but I have to just plug all three of the ladies' books here. You'll see genius in all three of these books. I'm telling you, they are brilliant. So Effie is my main character, and she is someone who represents the tough and gritty, strong women of Cornwall. So I fell in love with this legend of this painting, which is showing a gorgeous woman who's young and bereft. She's grieving. She's leaning over an elderly woman with her hand limply pointing to a big, very large Bible. And the light in the painting sort of moves around it, and it points to this woman. And when I looked at that, I just said, there's more to this story, and it's never been told. And locals say that it's the story of a legend that happened. And the legend can't really be proven completely, although there is documentation that said it happened 70 years before some say it happened. So I talk about that in my book, but I digress. The story about Effie is that she encapsulates the grit and also the folklorishness of Cornwall. And if you've ever been there, it's cliffs, it's gorgeous rolling green hills, It's sea and seagulls and seals, and it's just as gorgeous as you could imagine in England, Southwest England. And Effie is embodying that beauty and that strength, but she also possesses some of these folklorish powers that help her overcome all kinds of challenges to her dreams and her survival.
Thank you, Jill. And you just returned from Cornwall, is that right?
I did, because this is going to be a series of novels based on Frank Bramley's work. So Frank Bramley is a painter. He was from another area of England, but he lived in Cornwall and painted a series of paintings. And he was very interested in social realism, the social consequences of living tough lives in Cornwall as fisher people. And I talk about the implication for women being married to fish, basically. They were married to the lives of seamen, of fishermen, and what it meant to study fish and the way of life of fish and how that was their entire livelihood. And as Frank Bramley painted those dire and sometimes happy paintings, I follow his paintings through and tell the story of Effie and her husband and her family, and create various stories of her life and how she maintains her, I don't want to give too much away, but her powers as she grasps onto them and helps overcome and helps grasp onto her powers to manage the challenges in her life. And I'm going to create 5 books based on 5 different paintings, all by Frank Bramley.
Well, as long as we're
Wonderful.
plugging everyone's book, I had a chance to read an advanced reader copy of Jill's book and provided an endorsement for it. So if you head to her Amazon page for the novel, you'll find my quote. But yeah, it's a really wonderful novel and really engaging, kind of thrilling. And I really enjoyed how authentic it felt. I mean, I've never lived in a sea village in the 19th century, but yeah, it felt very authentic. Let's go back to
Thank
Donna,
you.
of course. Uh,
Yes, Colin.
Donna, you talked about pouring over thousands of letters and about writing a story that covers his entire life. So you must have discovered a lot about Vincent van Gogh that either you didn't know or other people didn't realize, and you kind of challenge what or what perceptions we have of Vincent van Gogh. So can you talk about challenging those perceptions, if you got any kind of pushback for it, and what kind of discoveries did you make?
Um, I haven't received any pushback yet. The book's been out for about 6 weeks or so. Um, I'm prepared for it, but I haven't received any yet, and I'm hoping that means I did my work well. When I dug into the research, it's very hard to talk specifics because in each woman's section, there are things brought to life that will shock you, and I don't want to spoil anything for the reader. But there were 3 things specifically that changed not only my belief about Vincent, but the trajectory of this book. And the first one is everything we know about Vincent van Gogh is based on the rumors perpetrated by 3 men. It's not based on medical reports, not based on police reports. It's not based on newspaper reports. It all comes from the rumors of 3 men. So basically what the world perceives as Vincent van Gogh's life is the National Enquirer version of Vincent van Gogh's life. And I made it my mission to give Vincent his truth. The second thing I found was the doctor who treated Vincent for his ear made a drawing of that wound. And its physiological logic throws that whole situation into question. There's more to that, and that's the part that I can't speak to, but that was enormously astounding. The last thing I found was an article published in December of 2020 in the American Journal of Forensics and Pathology. And what they did was apply modern day forensic science to the facts they knew about Vincent's death. And it included drawings and diagrams and everything. I don't know why they did it, but the conclusion will rock your world. And it rocked my world. I think I just sat looking at it like this for a good 10 minutes because I could not believe the conclusion that they came to. And yet, as I went through the letters, as I understood Vincent's life, it made so much sense, more sense than the myths that have been perpetrated about him. So it was a lot of intense work. It was actually 3 years of research for this book, the longest I've researched any book. But it was also COVID, so I like to tell people I spent COVID with Vincent van Gogh because I was living alone at the time. So he was my company through COVID, and it was wonderful. But the things that I revealed, things that are based on fact, not the National Enquirer version, the things that are based on police reports and medical reports, it will change everyone's perception of what Vincent's life was truly like.
You sound a little bit like a journalist there. Do you have a background in journalism?
I do. I
Okay.
do. Yeah. When I started writing before I started school, and every parent-teacher conference, my parents were told, she writes in English, she writes in science, she writes in math, she tries to write during gym. And my father would always say, they would say, she's going to be a writer. And my father's response was, no, she's going to get a real job. So, right, Stephanie. You see where I come from in that alone. So I got a marketing and communications degree for him and an English lit degree for me, as well as I ended up with a psych degree. So I do know the ways in journalism. And as I say at the end of this book, I saw myself not so much as a journalist, but as a defense attorney. And a defense attorney's job is only to prove reasonable doubt. And I have proved reasonable doubt.
Well, that's great, and yeah, good for you for putting in all that work and revealing all these things for readers to so that they can have their own reasonable doubt and maybe some critical thinking instead of just reading the National Enquirer.
Exactly.
Well, Ezra, I wanted to ask you about Frankenstein. I was watching, there's not a day goes by that I don't see some reference to Frankenstein. There was a commercial the other day with this guy fixing a car and a mob came after him, and then he's like, Frankenstein's castle is up there. So anyways, it was probably some progressive commercial or something. It's a cultural phenomenon and it's everywhere. But talk about, in your novel, you write the scene when Frankenstein was born, and it's a really wonderful scene. Talk about bringing that scene to life and just how a moment in time can become such a prolific, well-known pop cultural icon.
That moment is probably the most famous. It's certainly the most famous moment in the Shelleys' lives. And I suspect it might be the most famous composition moment in history. If you think of all the kind of great works, where was Tolstoy when he came up with War and Peace? I don't know, if you think like so many, but people kind of have this idea, oh yeah, so it's a dark and stormy night. Lord Byron's there, Percy Shelley's there, Mary Shelley's there. Mary's half-sister Claire Claremont is there. John Polidori, who writes the first vampire novel, is there, and they're all sitting around, and somebody says, shall we write a ghost story? And so everybody goes off and writes their ghost stories. And that was probably the most fun thing to write in a lot of ways, because it's the most well documented, both from kind of their kind of letters and things at the time, from the newspapers at the time, because everybody had these wonderful scandalous notions about what might be going on over in the Villa Diodati, about it was sometimes called the school of incest, and they were all up to wicked, terrible things. And there was across the lake, somebody was putting up telescopes to say, come and pay whatever you whatever that was, to come and peep through, and you can see what they're up to, these wicked people. I think for the most part they were writing. I'm sure there was a bit of frisky business going on, but for the most part they were writing and getting drunk, and then nerding out over Russo and people like that. So it's also really interesting because Mary Shelley writes quite a bit about it. And there's something about what you're saying there about trusting sources. This is such a big important thing, and a few sources they become fact, particularly when we don't have a lot of sources, that one little thing. And Mary Shelley writes about that night. Much later on in her life, she writes about how she was a devout, silent listener at the altar of Byron and Shelley. And that's kind of become the narrative, that she was there and silent and doing nothing. And I don't buy that one bit. For one thing, she is the most famous person at that party just by dint of who her parents are. Her parents are William Godwin and Mary Wollstonecraft, really famous, really radical people that everybody wanted to meet her, like so many famous literary people. Percy Shelley was nobody. No one, he was fairly posh, son of a baronet, but within literary circles, he was nothing. He'd, self-published a few things in his own little way. They hadn't sold. People didn't really knew who him, but Byron liked his work, met him. Okay, you're interesting, but he would be interested in Mary Shelley. And at the time that she writes this as well, when she's looking back on this time, she's doing an awful lot of work to remove herself from the public eye for some sort of complicated reasons. She's trying to get herself an allowance and prove that she's not a controversial person, but a very quiet, very well-behaved Victorian lady, which is fantastically not true. I'm currently working on the follow-up, which is going to be called Mary After Shelley, which is her life after his death, which is amazing. She forges passports. She goes through this whole elaborate scheme so that a trans man can marry this woman in France, gets them out of the country, does all kinds of kind of fabulous, daring and surprising things that, and at the same time is putting forward this, oh, I'm lovely, quiet Mrs. Shelley, I'm a widow, no harm can come from me, which I think is incredibly impressive. I very much admire her for that. But you're right about this kind of Frankenstein being so famous, and it's incredible that it's happening in her lifetime. Again, we think of Byron and Percy Shelley and people like that as being the famous names. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein sold more than everything of Percy Bysshe Shelley's in his life. Like, take everything else he wrote, Frankenstein sold more. When she came back to London after his death, she suddenly, there's a line where she, I can't remember if it's in her journal or in one of her letters, which she just said, I found myself famous. People know Frankenstein. There were 3 productions on in the West End of London. There were cartoons in the newspaper about this is, the Irish Frankenstein. This is the something Frankenstein. People misusing Frankenstein as the monster, and it's an extraordinary phenomenon, and amazing to think of this coming from a sort of 18-year-old girl in a pretty hectic life, sitting down, coming up with a ghost story, trying to kind of say, yeah, I'm as good as these guys, I'm going to write a ghost story. And what does she do? She changes an entire genre. Well done, Mary.
Well done, Mary.
Yeah, I think we all like to think our ideas can grow to something like that, but yeah, you just never know.
Yeah.
Well, let's go back to Stephanie. Stephanie, your novel, well, Frances Perkins is in the public eye and deals with a lot of now, I guess, better known, at least at this point, historical figures. Can you talk about your portrayal of those historic figures that are in Frances Perkins' life, and also your way of kind of fictionalizing and making this into a narrative instead of just maybe the humdrum of political dealings?
I'm so glad you asked this because I feel like in biographical historical fiction, people have a misconception that it's just, well, and then she did this, and then she did that, and then she did this. And it is not just a fictionalized sort of biography, or at least the best ones are not. The idea is really to find a narrative arc to add into that fictionalized biography so that it reads like a novel. And I wanted to make sure that this was not just a story about what the fantastic Frances Perkins did in her life, but who she was. And you can find that out by looking at where she came from. She was just a young woman in Maine. She was a middle class upbringing, but she had a lot of revolutionary roots, and she considered herself a patriot that had to change the world. And then she goes to New York to find her, not her fortune, but her mission in life. And she runs into all of these fabulously entertaining people like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who she did not like very much when she first met. And so that's what a novelist gets to really dig into. You get to show the unexpected and sort of funny things that happen, like the two of them meeting and reacting like oil and water. They do not mix. And so I loved finding those relationships that would tell us about who she was as a person, because she wanted us to think of her as a very stodgy old lady. She really dressed purposefully in a matronly fashion. But this is a woman who lived in Greenwich Village, and she loved the bohemian scene. And one of her best friends was Sinclair Lewis, who was a bad boy author and a
Right.
wild man and very funny, cut up. And her best friend is Mary Harriman Rumsey, who's fabulously rich. She's a party girl. And I loved getting into all of that. And I also love showing the story behind politics, because we think about politics in sort of a dry policy fashion. But for Frances, it was warfare. It was warfare. So she goes to Albany and she has to get this bill passed. Back then, it was the 54-hour work week. That's what she was working. And people were objecting. That's too short. People will be lazy. Nobody wants to work these days. And so Frances has to get around all this parliamentary procedure to win the vote. And I actually had enormous fun writing that because of the dramatics around it. And I could shape that into an action scene, even though it was politics. So I just love that kind of thing.
Fabulous. Sounds
Well,
great. Can I just speak to what the question you asked Stephanie? And historical novelists, historical novels are often misunderstood, perhaps. They are, the good ones, are based in history. There's a basis. There's facts that we can look up and follow. But I have a motto, and that is, it is the job of the historian to tell us what happened. It is the job of the historical novelist to show us how it felt.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's where the history becomes a novel. It doesn't detract from its truthfulness. It just offers it in an entertaining way, but it's still history.
And it should be fun, right, ladies?
And it should be fun. And that's where the novelist, the creativity comes in how we present the material in a fun way. Yes.
Very, very well said, Donna.
Thank you.
I definitely think
One of my
history,
things.
yeah, as was frankly the goal of this press is to use that entertaining aspect of historical fiction to bring readers to history, and I think that's what all of you have accomplished. I I couldn't have named Francis Perkins before this event. I'm sorry, but now I want to buy your book and give it to my Gen Z employees so
Yeah.
they can learn
Yeah.
how lucky they are.
Right.
One thing
Jill, go ahead,
really-
Ezra.
Ezra has.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
One thing I'm just like so interested in, like talking about this, this kind of making it entertaining, making it exciting. I know I found it. I wanted to make my book like a gothic novel, and I found it strange, kind of putting genre convention onto history. And I'm so intrigued, Jill, to know how you dealt with these kind of fantastical elements and weaving in the kind of grounded, genuine history alongside this kind of the more, well, okay, let's use imagination as well. How's that done?
Well, my first couple of books, I went with the unknown character, and they were more leaning on the continuum of biographical with drama and feeling mixed in, as you were describing. And this time I went down the continuum and went with more of an event and took the character and wove her in and around the facts, the socioeconomics of the time, and used the women that I know of the time, and I'm going to continue on with that. So, you know, what were the crimes of women against women during this time? What were the jobs available for women at this time? What were women allowed to own? What were the legal processes for women of this time? So I talk about these things and I apply them to the character. So my character Effie says, what choices do I have here in Port Quinn, the small dumpy town? I'd like to go somewhere else, but I really can't because I'm not allowed to own property. I can't really go anywhere unchaperoned. I can't really have a job that I select for myself, and I can't own property. In fact, my father owns me. I'm his property. So I have the character speak in the terms of the time. And just a little sneak preview of my next book, a character will become pregnant. She's not married. What often happened would be women would kill themselves, or somebody would kill them, or something would happen to them and they'd be buried at a crossroads. That happened. And that's, you know, it was so unfortunate, obviously, that that this is what happened, but this was commonplace. And so that's how you get some of this tragic history woven into the character.
Yeah, harsh.
Well, Jill, can you elaborate on that a little bit about the choices that Effie was left with and how she met those challenges without giving away too much?
So Effie would like to learn more about becoming more of a healthcare provider or giver, and she sees that there's a surgeon in her town that services a couple of little towns, and he's a London trained surgeon. And this is a fact. There were in the towns surgeons trained from London. You can read about it in the censuses. So I have the censuses, you know, for all the towns in the Cornwall areas that I'm looking for. And so those folks were very articulate, they were educated, they dressed properly. And so in my mind, if you want to become someone of an educated manner, but you can't get that education yourself, you start emulating the surgeon. You ask if you can be a helper. I'll ground herbs for you. I'll make tonics. I'll gather seaweed. Seaweed was used in the curing of arthritis. you know, all these kind of potions and tonics, Effie makes them. And as she's making them, she learns about how he's speaking. And instead of using the vernacular of her peers, she starts talking the way the doctor does. And she'll do anything to try to learn from him and emulate him. And that's one of the ways that she starts gaining skills about how to become more of a nurse type person, although that's not an opportunity that's anywhere near possible for her.
Well, thanks, Jill. Yeah, I think it's really great the way Effie is able to navigate some of those challenges in the novel, and I can see how it plays towards your theme. Well, I've got plenty of more questions for our panelists, but I want to invite our audience. If you have any questions for the panelists, please post them in the chat, and I'd be happy to ask them. I would like to ask Donna a little bit more about your background. We talked about your work as a journalist, but you're also a painter, screenwriter, and actor. How did that play a role in your ability to tell this story? And did you find any parallels between your artistic journey and Vincent's?
So that's kind of a two-part question. So I'll deal with the first part first. I am a painter. I'm an amateur painter. I'm not a bad amateur painter, but I am a painter. And so when I was reading Vincent's letters, we have to remember that before Vincent became a painter, he was a bookseller, an art dealer, a bookkeeper, a priest, and something else I'm not remembering. So he came to it very late. And he wrote of those times where he could see in his mind what he wanted to see on the canvas. He couldn't get it there. And I've been there. You can see that painting in your head. You know exactly how you want it to look, but you can't quite get it. So I immediately connected to Vincent and was empathetic with him on that. As far as my experience as an actor, I actually started acting at 17. And as an actor, you have to embody a character. You have to think like they do, to feel what they felt the way they felt it. And I think my ability to do that in this book and in all my books lends a deeper level of authenticity that not all, but some writers may not be able to attain without that kind of background. And I have to be honest, I tell people that these women, and I also want to say that I use the modern gender label fluidity when I named it Vincent's Women, because there is a man in there. But I lost my train of thought because I went on a sidetrack, which is so typical of me. Oh, acting. Some of these women, I tell people, you're either going to love them or you're going to love to hate these women. But they were extraordinary women on their own. And I can't wait for you all to meet them. But inhabiting the ones that you love to hate really just made my skin crawl at times. And when I was done with their sections, I actually smudged myself with sage just to get their energy out of me, because it was so dark and so tragic. And I was so deeply immersed in it that it affected me. And as I said, I do hope that it brings an authenticity to the work that the readers will connect with. As far as the parallels between me and Vincent and our artistic journey, I hope you're not implying that my books will become tremendously successful the moment I die. Just a joke. Stephanie gets my humor. I think the parallel is one of recognition and respect. In today's publishing world, no matter who your publisher is or if you're self-published, you were expected to put a lot of marketing money behind your work. My first book came out in 2009, and my marriage ended in 2009. But I also met Stephanie Dray in 2009. So it was quite the year. My ex walked off his job 3 days before our first court appearance, so I couldn't get child support or medical insurance. I did not have a single dime to put into marketing and promotion. And as a very successful author once told me, in today's publishing world, if a reader doesn't know that you and your book exists, no matter how brilliantly crafted it is, they're not going to read it. So getting that recognition and respect for my work, I understand Vincent's invisibility that he went through when he started to try and become a painter. I relate to it very well, as I related to many of the women. And I think that whole symbiosis created a great novel. I hope it did, at any rate.
We made a lot of good points there, and I can especially see how being an actor can kind of lend to a deeper sense of empathy for characters because you have to embody them like almost on stage.
Like you're going to
yeah.
portray them on stage,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
Well, we've got a couple questions here in the chat. I've got one for Ezra about your background in playwriting. Did you ever consider making the Aziola's Cry into a play? And also, how do you decide what projects to pursue as a play versus a novel?
Oh, yes. So yes, very much for the writing the Aziola's Cry as a play. That was my kind of, I think I started with a play. Maybe I started with the novel and then went to play and then came back to novel. I thoroughly planned to do a play version of the Aziola's Cry. I have a play in progress, but the thing I have found, and this kind of answers the second question, is that a 7-year story of the development of a relationship isn't really suited to a 1 to 2 hour play. I think the things that I feel for plays, I think I often tend to kind of have quite condensed moments that are kind of representing a whole lot. So the last 2 plays I've written were Tolstoy Tried to Kill My Girlfriend and The Grouchy Octopus Story, because you might as well have a silly title.
I love the first one.
Yeah, it was a wonderful
my
kind of
girlfriend.
mad dream where an author meets one of their characters. Their character sort of suddenly is there before me going, hey, I hear you're going to kill off my girlfriend in your novel. You can't do that. And the author has to defend killing this character's girlfriend, and they start bringing in other authors and other characters to defend, and they end up kind of having an argument between the different sides. But that's all kind of in real time. They're there. It's one dream. There's references to things that happened before, but it's just that kind of that moment. And the same for the Grouchy Octopus Story. It was, somebody who's in an aquarium. It's all happening within that 1 to 2 hours. And I don't think plays need to be that, but I think they often benefit from being a shorter time frame. So looking at doing the Aziola's Cry as a play, it's mostly what is actually part 6 of the book is the majority of. It's divided into 6 parts, and it's mostly that last half. That last part is the kind of the focus of what's being shown on stage, with little elements of kind of going back to little moments of flashback here and there, but there is that kind of one scene that's kind of blending it all together. But I think also they just kind of they form that way. The other kind of novels that I have 2 novels on the go at the moment. The kind of The Mary After Shelley, and also just one that has been loitering around for, I think it's now 9 years, so I really need to but it's just, that's the way it is. I'm bringing out a play this summer. We're having Pagoda Theatre are putting on another one of my plays, which is the the Piratical Adventures of the Good Ship Bookshop, which is about pirates running a bookshop, because I decided I'd done enough serious stuff with Mary and Percy and all their tragedies. I think let's have pirates running a bookshop for a while.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, me too. Well, we've got one other question here in the chat. It's for Donna. Which of your characters would be most surprising? I'm not exactly sure what Scott means by that, but maybe of Vincent's women, which one will surprise the readers most?
Wow. They're all going to surprise you. I think perhaps, Paul Gauguin. He is one of Vincent's women in this work. And what went down between the two of them, I think, altered drastically the remainder of Vincent's life. And that section is, while one of the smallest, it's one most packed with surprises. And they're not surprises that came from my imagination. Paul Gauguin wrote a diary as well as letters, and he laid himself bare. It's all there for anyone to see. And that no one has brought this information to light simply astounds me. So if I had to pick one that's the most shocking, I think Paul Gauguin would be first, and then Kivos. People may know of Kivos. She was in Irving Stone's Lust for Life, but I get into it a little deeper, and she was actually Vincent's cousin, but what went down between them was ghastly, absolutely ghastly. And again, all based on the descriptions from both of them in their letters. Those, I think, would be the two most shocking sections.
Well, it sounds like you've got plenty of shocking material.
It really is. It just never ends. That's why I've been doing a lot of live in conversation appearances, and even the person interviewing me says, I can't really ask Donna the question I want to answer because it'll spoil it for everybody there. So I'm learning to talk in these. Perhaps I have a future in politics because I'm learning to talk vaguely and around the actual subjects, which politicians seem to do so well.
Well, we're running up against the hour here. I always want to end with one question about the value of historical fiction. But before I get to that, our audience isn't just readers, but there are writers as well. And so I see Marcy has posted a question about literary agents and maybe your experience working with them. Would anyone like to hop on that question?
Yeah, sure. My literary agent is Kevin Lyon. I've been working with her since I was actually orphaned by my first agent. Around the time I was trying to publish America's First Daughter with my friend and co-author Laura Camoy. We were sort of taken up by another agent in the original agency who didn't really have the same vision for the book that we did. And Kevin, when we reached out to her, she did. And I'm so glad that we went with her because in the end, we only got one offer for that book. But one offer is all you need.
All you need.
So I've been with Kevin ever since. It's been a really delightful experience. And she's one of the kind of agents who says, she's representing you for your career, not just one particular book.
And I would just like to add to that. I think there's this perception of, I got to get an agent. I need it. There's a security factor. I'll write what they want to write, or I'll change things to their way just so I can land an agent. And I have to say that goes both ways. You have to have the same visions, You have to have the same goals for your career. And you, like Stephanie, I've been orphaned and had to find another agent, but we have the right to do that just as well. If you
Yeah.
don't feel you're being represented strongly with purpose, if your visions don't align, feel free to start looking for others. We have that right as writers.
Yep.
We're not tied. We're not.
And be
It's
wary.
better
I mean, even with Kevin, I remember I was very wary of her because I knew she had a lot of clients. And I didn't know if
That's a
she'd be
big
able to
factor.
handle them all.
Right. Right.
And so, you know, you should get as much information as you can, and then know it's always a risk, but it's a professional relationship. And if it's not working out, find another one.
Yep.
Very good advice, and maybe a panel proposal for Las Vegas in 2025.
Oh, did we lose Jill?
Yeah, Jill maybe got
Yeah,
disconnected
no.
there.
Oh dear.
Well, hopefully she can hop back on real quick just to wrap things up. I do want to thank our audience for attending today. I want to thank our panelists. Congratulations on your wonderful novels. This has been a really wonderful conversation, and we only just scratched the surface. So hopefully everyone now gets a chance to pick up your novels and learn about these amazing people and characters. And just from my like one of the reasons I do this, what's new in historical fiction, because it is really awesome to talk to historical fiction authors and to let them talk about all the work that you've done for years and years and years that comes out, and it's just you get so little gratitude for all that work that you're doing. So thank you for doing that work. So I just want to wrap things up then by asking, why historical fiction? You've done all the research, you have this journalistic background. Why not just write an article? Why not just write a nonfiction book? Why do we tell stories in order to share this history with people? Ezra, if you could start us off.
I mean, I think storytelling is one of the oldest, most human impulses. Yeah, I mean, I think we want to feel things. You know, I am so in favor of the humanities, of the studying literature. It's the most important thing you can study because it's how you study people. And there's one thing to do the research and look at all the, okay, here's all the dates, here's everything lined up, and that's so important that somebody's doing that. But then you also want to say, and how did that feel? And that's the wonder that I think stories can bring.
Thanks, Ezra. Donna, how about you?
I think the beauty of historical fiction is that it can entertain, enlighten, and educate. And there aren't that many fictional genres that can do what historical fiction can do. And for me, like Jill and Ezra and Stephanie, it's always been a goal of mine to bring the women that history forgot into the limelight. And there is no better mechanism for that than historical fiction.
And I'm going to try to bring Jill back on screen. She is still here. Okay, Stephanie, how about you? What's the value of historical fiction?
I'll just pick up with what Donna was saying. And Ezra, I think historical fiction is an amazing art form. It's fun to write, it's educational, and it allows us actually to contribute to the historical record in a different way. Historical fiction authors ask questions that historians do not ask. And it's not their fault. That's that they have a different job. And for, you know, a book like on Frances Perkins, there are 5 biographies about her already, but she did not want people to know about her private life. A historical novel gets to speculate on that private life, and I think people will remember her better if they know about all the personal struggles, her love life, her heartbreaks, her fight to balance being a single working mother with changing the country. These are things that we will empathize with and that don't really come out in a biography as much. So I know Frances wouldn't like it, but it's important for posterity that we understand and that we will remember her better. And historical fiction does that in a way nothing else can.
Definitely. And Jill is still here. I can't get her on video. Jill, I think you still have audio, so if you could let us know about the value of historical fiction with audio.
Sure, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yay, yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, I don't know, technical difficulties, probably my fault. So I think historical fiction rebalances with a truth that wasn't possible at the time. And so our stories actually rebuild history in a way that enables those people's voices to be heard with the drama, with the facts and the truth told in a different light because they're able to speak through us. And I think it's our mission to write and to read these truths that are now maybe more socially acceptable to hear and to write. And I think it's our legacy. And that's why I do it.
Oh, that's a very good reason and a good note to end this on. So thank you, Jill. Thank you to all our panelists. This has been really wonderful. And congratulations on your novels. And I hope you get lots of readers out there finding your stories.
Thank you.
Thank you, Colin.
Thank you.
Thank you for the great opportunity.
Nice to meet everyone. Thanks for the voices. Thank you.
Yes.
Take care, everyone.